Welcome to the Lost Signals Discusses Literature,
where we apply the revolutionary Mott skill
to classic and contemporary works of prose.
So, join us once again, won't you?
Hello, and welcome back to the Lost Signals Reviews Literature. Today we are doing a short story by the Charles Dickens.
A certain Charles Dickens.
Called The Signal Man. And I am going to introduce everyone first. I am your host, Steve-O, here with Scott Thurlow.
I am not a ghost.
And Chris Morgan. Woo woo! And I'm going to throw over to Scott for the funny log line.
Well, they both combined it. Choo-choo, it's a ghost train, is what I've got.
Excellent. Well, why don't you continue and tell us about the plot?
All right, so it's pretty bare bones, at least for a Dickens story. Basically, a man out for a walk who happens to see, a signal man who's working a lonely-ish post decides to, what a nice chat with this fellow and see what's up. And ends up hearing the signal man's story of apparently seeing apparitions each time preceding a accident or catastrophe involving the railway that, or at least the area that he's patrolling, regarding or watching. And on the third one, the narrator himself is somewhat disbelieving, but sort of wants to hear more of it and comes back to visit him. And of course, on the third time the apparition appears, they both run out Dickens style. Oh my God, there it is! And then the signal man is killed by an oncoming train shortly thereafter,
yeah. And
the narrator is informed of such. And that's pretty much it, and the story ends.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it. Like I said, it's kind of bare bones. It's I guess we'll say more about this in later questions, but I'm looking at either a 1 or a 2. It's fine for what it is. There's not much that happens. There's the three, the classic, three ghost trains of Christmas past, 3 ghost warnings about the train, and then the last one, results in the death of a character. So it's fine. It's a nice sort of atmospheric, almost Poe-esque tale,
yeah,
a Poe style kind of thing. But you guys tell me, 1 or a 2. I don't think it deserves a 3, but
I don't know. I'm possibly looking at a 3 for this. I think that I enjoyed it all the way through. I know that Chris is going to contend that it's a little slow going in the beginning. I didn't really find it that way. Yeah, that's true. I didn't really find that to be the case so much. I thought that it drew me in from the beginning. Your own belief of what's going on. Honestly, at first I thought the signal man was a ghost, right? Which I think was kind of
it could have been
on purpose.
Trope, yeah.
And then it goes through and he tells his story and he's just seems haggard throughout it, really
yeah.
distraught about his finding, what he's going through and dealing with. And it really pulled me in the whole time. I thought it was a good beginning, middle, and end to this story. I thought that there was plenty in there to keep my interest. And I may be alone in that in terms of this story among this crew, but I'm leaning towards a 3 right now, maybe a 2. But Chris, what do you think?
I'm giving it a 2, and here's why. With a lot of Dickens, and I've said this from the except for basically A Christmas Carol, which is a different style of his writing, he gets caught up, he sets the stage so well, but he loses me. I get caught up, I get the atmosphere, but I don't get the details. I mean, I don't know how to say it more than I lose the narrative. I get the atmosphere, I get the surroundings, but I lose the narrative, so to speak.
I see what you mean. At least I think I do.
Yeah, but the atmosphere is definitely there. And one thing I noticed is I don't know if this was the first story like this, but I think one of you said that, put in your mind, is this was the signal man a ghost? Was even the narrator a ghost? And this brought to the fore so many, you mentioned Poe, and there's so many things, that the whole story with the person who keeps calling the house, and it turns out it's the dead person who calls the house.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff like that, and I feel in a lot of ways this is the predecessor of the fatalistic ghost tale, for lack of a better word.
I think a lot of that's going to come into play in style.
Well, but that is it. But this is the reason I'm giving it a 2 because, as Scott said, what's there is probably could have been told in fewer words than this. But what I'm saying is there's a lot there with regard to atmosphere and the fact that atmosphere, and we'll get to more of it in style. But suffice to say, I'm giving it a 2.
All right. So, you're right. So this was published in 1866, I think is correct. I think I have here. So, yes, it's an earlier version of it. It's funny, though, I never for once, suspected or thought that the Signal-Man or the narrator themselves were a ghost in any sense. I totally just assumed they were 2 human characters who were experiencing supernatural things, or at least one of them was. So, maybe that's funny, in retrospect, that you can point that out. But, I guess, I'm still not going to give it a 3, but I think it's enough there for a 2. It's I was going to maybe mention this in style, but it's basically a spooky campfire tale or a spooky train yard tale if you will, instead. It's it has the elements it needs to have, but no more, no less. So I think it's enough for a solid 2, but I'm not budging any higher.
All right, that's fine. I think I'm going to stick with a 3. I think that there is enough there for me to say that this story encompassed everything that I need from a story to be full and have the plot be full for a short story.
Sure.
So I'm going to give it a 3, and we're going to move on to Chris with themes.
Themes. The themes is basically, I think, fear of the unknown. Because the Signal-Man did think the narrator was an apparition at first. He didn't. Basically, he made him come back the next night and apologize, saying, "I'm sorry. Basically, I'm sorry. I thought you were a ghost. Here's what happened, and here's why." But it is. To me, it is basically the fear of the unknown. But then again, you have that whole fatalistic thing where, the apparitions could have been warning him of what was coming for him. As I said, it's the fatalistic ghost story that I get a lot of. So thematically, it's kind of, again, it's one of these stories where it's kind of hard to put, hey, this story's about one thing or another. But this is also one of those things where the themes, the devil's in the details. For no pun intended. So it is a matter of the fear of the unknown, fear of one's own future, potential future. I'm not really sure. I'm leaning towards a 1. I'm just again, I get caught up in the atmosphere of this thing, and because to me, this type of story has become in and of itself its own genre by now. It's kind of hard for me to excise that. So
nah, I get you. I guess my jokey thing would be always listen to, or at least pay attention to apparitions when they're warning you of some unspecified disaster. But that's not really a theme for I don't know how you could extract that practically as a moral. But I see what you mean, Chris, the fatalistic kind of aspect to it is certainly there to an extent, but I don't know if it's enough for me. I'm leaning towards a 0, and for the weirdly, perhaps some of the same reasons you're leaning towards a 1, but a lot of it cuts up into probably style at least. So
yeah.
I'll toss it to you, Steve-O.
So I might have given this a 0 if there wasn't one really fascinating conversation about how he's talking about how, knowing what I know, how do I, and this plays in the fatalistic theme, right? Knowing what I know, how do I tell people that I know something bad is about to happen?
It's a Cassandra problem.
They will still disbelieve me. And I think that is a super strong theme of this. And I really like the way that it's done. You can't change, even though something terrible is going to happen, you can't change that is going to be the case. And that's just a human... throughout the course of human events, right? That's something that you'll see over and over and over again. It's everybody that cries foul about something, but they're not listened to until it's too late, right? You see this over and over and over again. This is just a classic example of that, and I really enjoyed that discussion that happens in I forget. It's the middle of the story or something like that. But
it's about the last third or so. I'm looking at it right now. Yeah. Go on.
But for me, that makes themes a 1. And, I mean, I could see why it wouldn't be, certainly, but for me, that outweighs any 0 that I'm going to give it.
All right, now that's a good point. Like I said, I wasn't like heavily inclined to a 0 just naturally. So I think that's solid enough that your point there stands and might push me up to a 1. You sticking with 1 or 2?
I'm gonna stick with a 1. I mean, I'm gonna go with a 1 because the conversation Steve was describing is exactly that point that completely hooked me into what was going on, got me caught up. So yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to give it a 1.
Yeah, I think it's strong enough there, so I will as well.
All right, cool. So antagonist is going to be me, and that is, I don't know, I guess his own premonition or his own ghostly premonition.
Perhaps.
Right? Like,
he certainly feels antagonized by something, whatever force is like beaming him these visions, even if it's like he's seeing them as like, sort of not as supernatural as they appear to be.
Right, so like, I don't know exactly how to describe this. Certainly he is feeling like a lot of stress, the signal man that is, about what's going on, right? Like, there's something that's antagonizing him, but I don't think it's there enough for me to give it. I'm not sure it's there enough for me to give it a 1, right? Like, I don't know if it's like solid enough, concrete enough for me to give it a 1, which is a funny thing to say about a ghost, right? But like,
that's exactly what I was gonna fucking make a joke out of for sure.
Like, you know.
But I get what you mean.
Who knows what the ghost is like? There's not that much care given to it because the narrator, who we follow, never sees it. So theoretically, it could be his own, like,
manifestations. Is what I'm saying.
Exactly. Like, we don't really know what it is. It's not really given form, and it's clearly there, but we don't have any insight into it really, and so I think I'm gonna give it a 0 unless I can certainly get talked out of that. I'm kind of wavering, but that's where I stand right now.
All right, that's funny that you mentioned that in both ways because it's sort of how I felt just previously, but allow me to make a case for a 1 perhaps. Sort of what you just said. It may depend upon like how much weight, if you will, like how real you think the visions are, like physically manifested, or if it's all in his own mind, like via the stress at the job. And like the loneliness and isolation of where his post is on the line. So like, but I think it might be a moot point because regardless, I think of however much you come down, he's still being antagonized by something in some way to a pretty good degree, and it certainly comes through in his character. So I think that for me is enough for a 1.
Yeah, I'm totally on the fence in this. I'm still seeing both of your sides. He was definitely antagonized.
Whether or not it's real is all my point.
Right. But as we, in the past, and I think Scott and you and I definitely always lean to these nebulous kind of things as
abstract kind of shit. Sure.
Abstract, yeah. But without whether it's his own self, his own fears, whether there was actually a physical manifestation, basically kind of all points to the same thing, if not in fact in interpretation, and all we have is this guy who is antagonized, who is freaked out, without whom there would be no story. So I'm gonna come down Scott's side. I'm gonna give this one a 1.
Let me ask you guys this: do you think that the Signal Man is a protagonist?
No, I think he's a secondary character. I was going to wait to say that, but...
What is our protagonist antagonized by?
Trying to help the Signal Man? There was a conversation, to be fair. That's a good question, actually. There was a conversation where we're trying to convince him of, like, listen, go see a doctor, perhaps, again, like, he tries to sort of ground him and at least help him understand himself, the Signal Man and protagonist, that is, like, what exactly is happening, and alleviate his stress in a sense. So I think, like, while the narrator is not antagonized, certainly to the degree that the Signal Man is, the Signal Man might be somewhat of he's antagonized by the situation then, if not the character himself, if that makes sense and answers your question.
Certainly, he's got his own, like, little amount of stress towards the situation, which grows throughout, which is part of the reason that I really like the plot of this.
He's almost antagonized by the Signal Man's story, if you will, or at least how he seems to take it to be such a real thing.
Yeah, but like
he becomes increasingly uncomfortable.
I don't know. For me, that's not enough to give antagonist a 1. Like, that's kind of how I'm looking at it at this point. I think I'm going to stick with a 0. I completely get if you guys are going with a 1.
That's a fair angle to take.
I was going to say that really kind of threw threw me for a loop on when you said that.
And I wouldn't have argued with you if you said the Signalman was a protagonist in this either.
That's a
No,
harsh question,
But
too,
that's
yeah.
why I asked. Like I want to know how you view him, because he's the one that's certainly more antagonized. And if we had gotten this story from his perspective,
That's true.
there would have been a very strong antagonist, because we would have seen the actual apparition, through his eyes, right? But we don't. We get a secondhand version of it. We get his story, and clearly the narrator, our actual
It's like
protagonist,
secondhand antagonism.
wants to help him out, but he's not really. To me, by my way of viewing it, he's not really antagonized by it. So
I get you're saying that, and that's actually pretty good too, like you said, and kind of tripped me up now having talked it out. So that's true. I think it's to make it consistent and to stick to the question you asked me. Since I'm not lumping or viewing the Signalman as a protagonist, therefore, even though whatever antagonistic force or forces are against him, that's a secondary character.
sure.
So yeah, I think you got me on that. I will switch back to a 0. In fact, well talked out,
Yeah, Steve-O.
well argued.
Steve-O for the win on this one. I'm giving it a 0 as well.
Good call.
All right. Well, we got zeros all around then, sounds like. And then we're going to go to protagonist, Scott.
All right, so I sort of mentioned it just now a bit, and the thing is, he's somewhat fleshed out, but again, because he's sort of passively taking in this tale to an extent, certainly the Signalman has more characterization than he does throughout. But it's not that he has 0, it's just that, again, it's not the focal point. We find ourselves somewhat in a situation where it's more of a vehicle for this story itself to be told, versus being a fully fleshed out character. But neither is he a one-dimensional character either.
Right.
So it's weird, because this one I could almost be convinced either way as well. So I shall defer to you gentlemen to come up with good arguments for which way we should score it.
I was just going to say this is going to fall into he's a protagonist. He's the narrator. But he is he doesn't propel any events. He
It's not
doesn't
about
really,
agency, yeah.
He doesn't really have any effect
Some, but
on
not
everything.
much.
He is just basically a reporting of the facts. And I don't really know. Again, this would come into this would be something that we might have to examine with regard to the scoring. But I have to say, because he doesn't have any agency, I'm going to have to lean to a 0 on this one.
Or at least not much. What do you think, Steve?
Those are very good arguments. I was initially going to give him a 1, because I like his character. I feel like he's a good audience surrogate, whereas he kind of does the things that I would want him to do, or I would do in that situation, I guess. And because he's so nondescript, I could see myself kind of there. If only I was alive in 1856 or whatever, and at an abandoned fucking train yard or something. But I see exactly what you guys mean in terms of your arguments, right? He's kind of
Because he's a nondescript, then there's not much to him.
Yeah, he's just
He's a template.
He's like fucking, I don't know. He's
You're supposed to project yourself onto him, as you just said. So
yeah.
sure, he's like, hey, tell me more about this ghost story, and then you get more of it from the secondary character. But it's not like he's doing much of anything else.
Yeah, I mean, you're right.
That serves
He
any other
does.
purpose.
He has his most important function in this is to bring us the story
Extract the
from
tale.
someone who is
Exactly.
outside of what's going on.
Yeah.
He's not part of he's not a train folk, right?
Exactly. Not a trainee,
Yeah.
if you will.
And he kind of gets this whole story from the outside, and it gets weirder and weirder until finally his buddy is dead. Man, this is rough.
What I'm saying is there's only enough there so that he drags the story along, but he's not making much decisions, not even fleshed out much.
See, I wouldn't describe it like that though. In terms of drags the story along, right?
I mean, not in a negative way. He carries you along. Then, if you want to change,
He's our portal into the world.
yeah. But portals don't have a lot of personality, is what I'm
Right.
saying.
Well, certainly. He's got some personality. I would
yeah,
say.
some, but not a lot.
He's our empathetic, touchstone, right?
I guess, but to me, it's not like there's not enough there to credit with him a 1 on our scale in this instance. As my final like.
Are you guys both giving it a 0?
Yeah, Portals of
Yeah.
personality. I love that. Yeah, I'm giving.
You're
it a
welcome
0.
for that. But so this is my final thought on protagonist.
We should make that into a T-shirt.
So
I was thinking the same
we'll
thing.
put it on the
All
wall
right.
after this.
I'm gonna be convinced by you guys and give this one a 0 as
All
well.
right. You're going to be convinced.
I'm going to be
A
convinced.
ghost convinced you.
Yes.
All right.
Turns out that I was convinced. We're gonna move on to supporting characters with Chris.
The supporting character, I think we all agree, is the Signal Man, without whom there would be no story. He is definitely this one
He's
of,
the centerpiece.
if the not the strongest aspect of the story, and he is getting 1.
Wonderful. Yes, he's really good. I think that it's a fascinating, like, little character study, I guess, about this guy who's like just within a very short period of time, just gone from like standard Signal Man to completely insane person, and then dead. Like, and for no reason that anybody could possibly figure out. Like, it's just bad stuff happened. He got premonitions of bad things, and then the bad thing was him.
Yes.
Like,
What's
it's,
his
I don't
name?
know. It's like awesome. I really like this
I'm
story.
drunk, I'm famous, I'm drunk, I'm nobody,
Yeah.
I'm drunk, I'm dead.
It's fucking Jim Morrison.
Um,
But yeah, it's. I'm gonna give it a strong 1.
So no, I agree, of course, because he's the titular character in the story, and I think like I said, in the way that the protagonist doesn't have all the things I just said, the Signal Man does. Like, you get a lot of his personality, a lot of like how he lives his life, at least in this setting, in the setup, and like I know I tend to overuse this, but and maybe this is somewhat style as well, but he almost feels like a Lovecraftian-ish
Yes.
or a Lovecraftian-like kind of protagonist because he feels like he's seeing things no one else can.
Going insane.
Yeah, exactly, and going increasingly,
slowly
getting
throughout.
increasingly, frazzled by them throughout
Mhm.
until he meets his own ultimate untimely fate. So yeah, I think he's quite strong, and you guys said the rest of it. I mean, he definitely deserves a 1.
All right, so that's 1s all around there. I am going to continue with dialogue, and you know what? I think the dialogue in this is actually really strong. The tension is built in this entire story through dialogue between our protagonist and the Signal Man. And for the point that I didn't give the protagonist, I'm going to give his dialogue a very strong point. Like his conversations
That's
with
fair.
the Signal Man, and just the way that things get like. It's this weird, like, I like that you mentioned, like, Poe and Lovecraft in terms of this, because, like, they both have this weird way of doing kind of the same thing where it's like, you don't even notice that things are getting more tense until it's really tense, and they're like, oh, God, like, my shoulders are, like, bunched up around my fucking jaw
It's very effective.
and shit. Like, I think that this story does a very good job of doing that same type of thing, and I'm going to give it a strong 1 for that.
No, I largely agree, so maybe, Chris, you'll build on this, but I don't normally prefer Dickens' style or like his dialogue even, but perhaps that's because it's usually associated with longer works, and this one is a much shorter work. But I do agree that I think the exchanges were quite well done. They were grounded in reality, they made sense, and without them there would be no tension, there would be no story.
Yeah.
At least as effective as it is. So yeah, I think you have to give dialogue a 1 on this one.
I agree, but you definitely have to give dialogue a 1. That conversation was definitely what hooked me. Again, this is one of those things where even if I didn't enjoy the dialogue, which I did, without the dialogue, there would really be no story, because that is the story.
The story of
well,
the
I mean-
story
I
of
mean,
the story of trains.
But that's the thing about Dickens. I agree with you
Sure.
on his longer works, but another thing is,
Train's going to give it to you.
in a vacuum, I don't know if that's the right word, but
Removed from that, perhaps?
Dickens is good with dialogues. It's just that a lot of you can notice it more here than the quotables from his longer work, so to speak.
I hear you.
But here, it definitely serves a purpose. I'm definitely going to give it a 1.
All right. So that's 1s all around dialogue-wise.
Looks like it.
And Scott, why don't you tell us about style?
All right, so similar to what I mentioned, I don't normally prefer a lot of Dickens. Like, I never got as into him as perhaps others may have been. Like, I understand why he's touted as the writer he was, and sure, he's fine. But, and like I said, maybe it's because he was, like, as part of his normal style, again, in longer works, is that he padded it out a lot because of the nature of like how he was doing his work. So in this one, I felt it was at least more manageable, palatable in a sense. So I think I'm going to give style a 1, but I think because it was cut down to such a shorter 10-page story, whatever it was, I think if this were expanded to like a similar work in which on par with like his other actual longer works, then it would have lost a lot of it, and it wouldn't have been as effective. So I do like it here, and it does tie into dialogues.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I know you're a big fan of Lovecraft, and Lovecraft is
He can
a
be
writer
for sure.
where I read Lovecraft and I love it, but there are times where I'm like, shut the fuck up already.
I
Stop
understand.
it. And I get exactly what you mean, but I think that the style of this is perfect. It's such a good ghost story. There's such like this dark atmosphere that he brings about, and like I've read
disagree.
a little bit of Dickens, not much. I think I read like Great Expectations
majors, yes.
and like maybe I think I read part of Tale of Two Cities, but like I would not have expected something like this from Dickens, and like I loved the atmosphere that he was able to give this story all the way through. It just felt like very atmospheric and creepy, and like that's exactly what it needed to be. I see this as something written by like, for somebody that's like so far out of the normal. I mean, I guess like he kind of channels like the Ghost of Christmas Past feeling, sort of, but like
to an extent
in
Christmas Carol.
The Christmas Carol, Jesus Christ. But like I fucking love this feeling that he's able to evoke here, and like I think that that's something that like you can really attribute to like a master of the art, and like I'm gonna give style a very strong one in this.
Yeah, it's all well said.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to give him a very strong one to style. And I think I mentioned a lot of it in why I gave this 2. And it's really funny you brought up Lovecraft and Poe, and I'm not sure if it was this. Gaiman and even Clive Barker always have this real sense of atmosphere and knowing exactly what's going on.
Build it. Yeah, I agree.
And you could see the world around you. And in like say like Gaiman or Barker, it's like fewer words, and like Lovecraft and Dickens, it's many words. But
it all works.
Yeah, it does all work, and the atmosphere of this is something that I could really wrap myself around in, and I love this type of atmosphere, and I'm definitely going to give it a 1.
Yeah, my thought is funny that like if I didn't know this Dickens, someone just handed it to me without his name on it.
Yeah,
I don't think I would place it as him.
No.
It might take me a while.
Neither would I.
But it's still a well done story, and not knowing that it is him, like you can appreciate it. Again, like I said, maybe versus other works, but just on its own, it works quite well. So
absolutely. All right, so that's one's all around for style. Let's go to recommendation, Chris.
Yeah, I'm going to recommend it. I think in a lot of ways we've talked about so many works that this could have possibly influenced, or authors this could have possibly influenced in a genre that it could have possibly influenced. But I think overall, and I think you just hit upon it, is that this is a very atypical work from Dickens.
yeah, at least for him, like I said.
Yeah, for him. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. It took me a couple pages to get into, but once I was in, I was hooked, and I couldn't pull my eyes from the pages, and yeah, I'd recommend it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, I don't want to say reluctantly, but like at this point, yes, it's a solid story. It's a good ghost-ish story as well, like you said, and even beyond that, it stands for what it is. And yes, perhaps again, I may have been unfairly or like can't escape my bias comparing it to this other stuff that I don't like as much, but I do still think it's worth a read. And again, it's quick enough, and if you like a ghost kind of tale, like we said, the authors we just mentioned in that vein. From him, this is a very solid one.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a fairly short story. I think it's like 12 pages or something.
Yeah.
And it's just a... So here's the people that should read this. Anybody who's interested in ghost stories. Anybody who's interested in really good writing. And like how to craft a short story.
Good overlap.
Check it out. Honestly, like you guys said, I would have never pegged this as a Dickens work. if I hadn't known the author beforehand, but I really like that he's able to go outside of his normal like comfort zone and
Or at least it feels as if he's doing such.
I don't even know because I haven't read enough Dickens to know if this is like, way outside of what he normally did or anything like that. But like, this was a terrific short story, written, done very, in and out very quickly, but still brought across
Sustained
all of
throughout.
all of the things that it needed to do. Very dark, had this like dark gothic sense to it, which is really cool.
Well said.
And I'm going to give it a strong one for a recommendation. So I think that's everybody, right? Anybody else have anything else to mention?
Nope. I think that's it. What do we got there?
So I gave the best score with an 8. You guys both gave it a 7, which leaves us with a 7.333 repeating
That's
forever.
perfectly fine.
Into the ghostly abyss.
It's about what I would give the story, I think.
Yeah,
On an arbitrary numbers
which
scale.
I think is a pretty decent score.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to call it quits. This has been Lost Signals Reviews Literature. I've been your host, Steve Ramosi, here with Scott Thurlow.
I'm the Signal Man, Cuckoo Cuckoo.
And Chris Morgan.
I'm like, oh, hell of a good night.
Editing and engineering by Stephen Ramosi. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.